Jacobs. I am a program manager in the AppFabric developer platform team, which probably doesn't mean a lot to you, but it will in the future, I guarantee it. No, AppFabric is kind of the cool new name that we have for all kinds of middle tier stuff. And so we are responsible for Windows Communication Foundation, Windows Workflow Foundation, and all that sort of stuff. So today we're going to talk about building state machine workflows with Windows Workflow Foundation. Now, whenever I create a talk for an event like this, I have to make some assumptions going in, right? I mean, I can't cover everything, and I have to make some assumptions about you. So I have one goal today, and that goal is to just explore the state machine implementation with you. And, we won't possibly be able to explain everything about it, and we have lots of great resources to help you with it. But I do want to kind of just open your eyes a little bit, give you a chance to see what it does and see if it could work for something that you're building. And in order to get that goal, I have to assume that you probably know something about Windows Workflow Foundation. So I'm not going to cover introductory material today on Windows Workflow Foundation, or there's lots of stuff I'm going to leave unsaid. And I apologize if if you're really unfamiliar with Workflow Foundation, some of this might not make sense to you because I won't explain some of it in detail. But we have lots of things to help people who are brand new to workflows. So if you're going like, how does that work? We'll get there. All right. Anyway, so this is just a basic quick introduction to what workflow is. In a nutshell, it's really about a declarative way where you could build activities that we can plug together into a program. And these activities can be written in code. They can be authored declaratively in XAML. And we have a design environment that allows you to author them in Visual Studio. But you can also take that design environment out and create a design environment for your customers. And so, for example, on the most recent episode of Endpoint TV, which is my show on Channel 9, how many people have seen Endpoint TV? Oh, great, lots of people. Okay, so we had an episode I posted last week with some of the guys from Microsoft's product quality organization. And they had, those support troubleshooter wizards, that you see, like you go to support.microsoft.com and you say, I've got a problem with, Windows 7, and they take you through this little wizard that helps you, is the computer plugged in, things like that. And, they do all of those steps. And so they have these cool wizards. Well, they had a problem that they wanted to be able to create these wizards more rapidly. And, of course, the person who creates the wizard is a support analyst. They're not a developer. But every time they wanted to create a wizard, they'd have to spin up a developer project, and write a bunch of code in ASP.NET MVC. And so they wanted to give a way for the support analyst to create the wizard, right without any code. And so they created a nice design experience, some custom activities. They plugged that into their MVC app. And today, a support analyst can author a wizard without getting the developers involved, and they're pretty happy about that. So this is some of the things that people do, and if you want to hear the whole story of that, go watch Endpoint TV, and you'll see it. All right, I like Wikipedia. Now my kids tell me their teachers at school say, you can't use Wikipedia. I don't know where they get that. I mean, I think Wikipedia is pretty cool. I've actually written some articles on Wikipedia about stuff I know about. And has anybody else authored Wikipedia? Good for you. Good for you. All right. So this is what Wikipedia says about state machines. And I thought it was okay. It's a behavior model. I like that. It's a model of behavior that you want your program to have, and it's composed of a finite number of states and transitions between the states and actions. Okay, let's just leave it at that. Now, when I want to think about a state machine, I was trying to think of a good example. And I decided that since we're here at a conference, probably most of us stayed in a hotel. You probably have something like this at your hotel, right? You have a door. The door has a handle and, a nice little do not disturb or whatever, right? So if we thought about this door, it has a state, right? Like right now, it is in the closed state. Door is closed. Okay, and then it's going to remain at that state until something happens, and there's an action. So if some person or robot or whatever walks up and opens it, right, then the door is in the open state. Okay, you with me so far? States, right? Open, closed. And then if I let go of the door and it's got that automatic close thing, then it is in the closed state. So we think of these things like open and closed, those are states. And then the actions that cause them to move between these states are really the transitions, right, that the state happens. Now, and I thought that's pretty good, but really it's not correct. I mean, the door is actually a little more complicated than this, right? You can imagine if we thought about the door, it probably has a card reader, right, on it. Mine does. I assume yours does, right? Okay, so if we have this, then what's the first state then? If we walk up to this, it's not just closed, it's locked, right? So there's a state called closed and locked, okay? And then if I put in a card, that's a good transition, right? I insert my card, but it's not just the transition that I insert the card. There's something more that happens here, right? Because not just any card can open the door, right? As you've probably found out, if you ever walk up to the wrong door and you're like, I think I'm in this room, and what's really embarrassing is when the guy in the room comes and opens the door and like, what are you doing? Yeah, so there's a guard condition here that the action is not always going to necessarily open it, right? Because it has to be authorized, right? But if the card is authorized, then we move to the closed, unlocked state, right? So that's pretty cool. And then of course, then you have to open it, and then the door is open, and then we move back to closed, right? So states can get kind of interesting, and these graphs of behavior models can really expand. In fact, this doesn't even capture all of it, but we're going to drill even further into the door state machine. And so, but before I do that, let's think about workflow. Now, how many people here would say, I have used Windows Workflow? Okay? All right, good. Most of you have used Windows Workflow, so you're probably familiar with the idea of control flow. So in Windows Workflow, we have 3 kinds of control flow that we ship out of the box. This does not mean this is the universe of all control flows. In fact, you can create your own control flow mechanism. We happen to ship 3 of them. So the first one is the sequence, then we have the flow chart and the state machine. Now, if you're asking which one should I use for my workflow, I think of it as a spectrum of control. On the right side is a sequence, and a sequence is great for when the workflow is in control. Like the workflow says, we're going to do this, then this, then this, and this. And you just kind of flow right on down through it, and sometimes you have a loop, and you might loop around and things like that, but generally sequences flow right on down forward. It's very natural, and it's easy for people to understand. If you wanted to be a little more flexible and occasionally have business logic that says like, oh, if we get in this situation, we want to go back up to here and then do stuff like that, a flowchart is a nice balance between reaction and control. See, on the react side is I want to write a program that reacts to things that people do or conditions in the world or events that are happening. So I write a program that reacts. In this case, I have a program that's a little more passive. It's kind of responding, but it still wants to direct the flow of things. Then on the far side with the state machines are all about react. Right? They kind of listen for things. What's going on? Is somebody unlocking the door? Is somebody opening the door? Is it closing? I don't know. It's not telling the door what to do. It's just reacting when the door does something. You see the difference? Right? So if I'm writing a program that wants to kind of listen to the world and react when things happen, then I want to use a state machine. Okay. So I was talking with a guy who is one of our early adopters for the state machine, James Trott. Now, he's not here today. He's over in the UK. But James writes software that does a lot of track and trace kind of scenarios. So what do I mean by track and trace? Well, let's imagine that if you were a mechanic and you're like working on cars and trucks and stuff, and so maybe there's some kind of part that you need. So you want to place an order for this part. And this part's kind of an expensive thing, but it's a sort of thing where you get a new part, but they take back the old one and you get some credit toward your purchase, or they can repair or refurbish it. So he placed an order with Contoso, right? So Contoso has a state machine that they would use then to track this thing. So the first thing that happens after you place the order, then the state machine wakes up and says, oh, we have an order. Okay, I'm going to tell the guys in the warehouse to load that thing on the truck. So it sends a message to the warehouse, they load it on the truck, and the first thing they record is a proof of dispatch, right? So that we know that this thing was loaded on the truck and it got sent. So the guys in the warehouse scanned a barcode or something and, we got it on the truck. And then the next thing that happens is the truck gets to the shop. It's, they hand it to some guy who signs for it, and when they sign for it, they got proof of delivery, right? And so the state machine is kind of tracking this whole process. And then later, they need to pick up the old part, so they get proof of collection. And then they hand it to somebody in the shop who refurbishes it and repairs it and returns it into inventory. So you can imagine that I just described the perfect scenario where everything works according to plan, right? But you know that in the real world, stuff happens like they load the wrong thing on the truck, or, the guy at the shop says they never got it, but they did get it, or they didn't pick it up, and all kinds of things happen. And the state machine could react and move things in this process around. So James writes these systems that track all these things and produce reports so that you can go to the website and say, where's my part? I ordered that part. Or, we sent back the old one. How come we didn't get credit for it? And it has to be able to report what's happening in the system. All right. So I decided to write a state machine for our security door. And I actually went online and researched how do these security door systems actually work, like hotel security doors. I really did. I read up on it. And they don't work like what I'm going to show you. Okay? I'm just going to tell you right now, in case anybody in the room is in that business, you'll be like, no, we don't do that. But trust me, it's okay. This is just an example. Okay? So one of the things we're going to have to do is authorize card keys, right? So when you put in the key in the door, we want to authorize it. And then we need to be able to log when doors open and close in case there's some kind of a court case, like, somebody gets accused of assaulting a maid or something like that. We might have to be able to demonstrate what happened with the door. Okay, and the other thing we'd want to do is warn security when, like if you prop the door open or something like that. Or like in the spy movies where some guy comes and puts tape over the door thing so that it looks like it's locked, but it's not really. So we want to detect that and warn security when that's happening. So what we're going to do is have a server, and then we're going to have some messages that go back and forth between this door hardware and the server, some notifications about what's going on. And so that's the thing I wanted to build. And to make it really interesting, I decided to build the client in Silverlight, which is, I never do Silverlight, okay? And if you follow my blog, you've seen some of my painful discoveries about using Workflow and Silverlight and workflow services, but it was good that I did it because I've got some help for you. All right, so let's look at the security door. Actually, though, before we do that, when I was going through this presentation yesterday, I decided to show you something else first. And the something else was a little more simple and explanatory. So let's go do the other thing first. This is a sample I have out on MSDN Code Gallery, and there's an Endpoint TV episode about exploring the state machine. Because I think it's really important if you're going to... Oh, I went to the wrong machine. Excuse me. There we go. It's really important if you use the state machine activity that you understand how it likes to function. Okay? So... here is a simple state machine. You see here I have state 1, state 2, state 3, and then a final state. Okay? So I just wanted to create a little simple app so that we could just see how this thing works. Now, the start thing up here is just a visual element. It has no functionality at all. You can't do anything there, and you can't do anything with the arrow between the start thing and your first state. Okay? So the first state is where the state machine begins. And you remember I said that a state machine is about reacting. And your first opportunity to react to something that's happened is right in here inside the state. So if I double click this, you see I get an entry action. That just says anytime I enter this state, we're going to do something. So what I want to do here is just write line that we entered state 1. Okay, and then we have an exit action, which just says, anytime we exit this state, I'm going to do this. Okay? No matter how we came in, how we got here, these things are going to happen. Enter and exit. So the first thing you're going to think about when you're new to state machiners are like, okay, I'm in the state. Now what do I do while I'm here? Nothing. You do nothing. That's the point. You enter the state so you can react that you're entering, and you can react when you're exiting. But while you're there, it's like you do nothing. So what happens when we're doing nothing? Well, that's where these guys come in. These other arrows, these are transitions. And these transitions, in a state machine, anytime you're going to leave a state, it's because a transition has been triggered. Right? So let's look at a transition. This transition says we're going to go to state 2. Now, how many people did state machines in Workflow 3? Anybody? Okay, just a handful. So in Workflow 3, we had restrictions like, and the first activity in a trigger had to be this special, implement this special interface, and it had to be a thing that had this certain event and all that kind of stuff. There is no such restriction in the Workflow 4 state machine. You can put anything you want in a trigger, anything. And it doesn't even have to wait. It could be something that just, boom, happens. So the way it works is all of the triggers are racing to see which one gets to go first. And if none of them wait, but they all just do something, then the one that wins is the one that comes first in the XAML. That's just the way it works, okay? But normally what you want to do is you want your triggering transition to wait for something. So what I did here is I put this inside of a cancellation scope so we can see, later we'll see the behavior here, but here's what I want to do. When we enter this triggering transition, I say we're in the trigger, the 2-state 2 trigger, so I'm going to right line that. And then I have an activity here called test bookmark. And that activity just creates a bookmark. A bookmark is a way where an activity can say to the workflow runtime, I need some data. And I'm not going to be finished until I get that data. So you set a bookmark. Now, where does this data come from? Well, in this case, it comes from the host application. So the workflow runtime will get to this activity which sets a bookmark, and when it's done being invoked, the workflow runtime says, that activity has an outstanding bookmark, so it is not complete. So what will happen is effectively right here, this branch of execution waits. Okay, so this one is waiting. And if we look at the 2-state 3 transition, it does exactly the same. So we're going to get 2 transitions that will go do this, they'll write out that we're in the trigger, and then they'll both wait for something. Okay? And what is this one waiting for? It's waiting for a bookmark, and you can see the property over here. I gave it the name of the bookmark will be state 2. Okay, and so whenever the host resumes with state 2, this bookmark will get triggered, and we'll be on our way. Okay, then the other thing I did in the cancellation handler here, I just write that this transition was canceled so we can see what happens. All right. Now, as we go down here a little bit farther, you see that there is also a condition. Okay, you remember I said whenever a transition happens, sometimes we don't want the trigger to proceed. Like with the hotel key, remember I said if you put in the card key and it's not the right card key, we don't want to open the door. Right? We were waiting for a card key, but we don't want to open the door unless it's a valid card, if it's authorized, right? So in here, I'm just going to say if the value equals 0. Now, where did I get that value? I get that value when the bookmark is resumed, okay? So the host is going to resume a bookmark, and if the value is 0, then we're going to go on, and then we get a chance to react one more time. This reaction is in the transition. So we can transition, or we can react when we enter a state. We can react when we transition to another state. We can react when we exit a state. Okay? All right. And so then the rest of the diagram is not very interesting. We're just going to, when we get to state 2, we're going to say we entered and exited. This one down here is what we call a null transition, meaning there's no trigger. If there's no trigger, it just happens automatically. It just flows right on through. Okay? You can only have one null transition out of an activity, because if there's more than one, then that would be stupid, right? So we're not going to do that, just one. And so, but every state has to have at least one transition. So we're going to have one that takes us over to the final state. And the final state is the last thing in our workflow, and you have a chance to do one last thing when you enter the final state. Yeah, that's your last thing you can do. All right. So there's this other transition here that's a little more interesting. I'm going to hold on that. We'll show it to you in just a minute. Let's run this first. Okay. So all the yellow text is the write lines coming from the workflow. All right. The white text is coming from my console app. All right. So you can see that I have three transitions that so first of all, we entered state 1. Okay. So we're in state 1 right now. And then I have three transitions that have written little messages here. The countdown one, which is not enabled, then the toState 3 trigger and the toState 2 trigger were written out there, okay? And then we say, the host is asking which one do we want to go to. So let's see, I'm going to go for 2, state 2. All right, so we resumed the bookmark named state 2 with the value of 0. Okay, so look what happened when we resumed it. The other transitions were canceled. Okay, so we had already started in those transitions. We did the write line, we entered the test bookmark and all that, and those transitions were just waiting. But they are now canceled because state 2 transition 1, right? And so they get canceled, and you can see the order. So first of all, after we resume the bookmark, the other transitions get canceled, then we exit state 1. Now we're in the no man's land between states. Okay, we're not in state 1 anymore. And then we get the action of the toState 2 trigger. So it's trigger, cancel the other transitions, exit the state, then do the action. Then we went into state 2 and immediately right out of state 2 with that null transition and went to the final state. Okay, you see how the flow went? You with me? All right, now just to make this really confusing, let's do something else. So, I was thinking about when I was in the airport, the check-in kiosk things. Those are cool, right? I mean, those have totally transformed airports. Remember the old days when you had to wait in big long lines, to talk to a person, and now you can walk up to the automated kiosk. Those are great, and in fact, in the state machine hands-on lab that we have, I have you building an ATM machine that's backed by a state machine. And one of the things that you have to do in kiosk-like airport things or whatever is you have to deal with human timeouts, right? Because you got a human standing there and they're punching buttons and they get distracted with a cell phone call or something and they're a kid or something, and then you have to pop up a thing like, "Are you still there? Do you need more time? Would you like me to call someone to help you?" I wish they would have that. Would be a great thing, wouldn't it? So I thought, well, let's show how you could implement that with this state machine here. So I have a countdown transition. Let's look at that one. So I have a little Boolean that I pass in as an argument if I want to enable the countdown. So if we're enabling it, then here's what we're going to do. We'll write a little message like the workflow will end in so many seconds. We'll increment or decrement our little counter, rather. And then we have a delay activity. This delay will wait for 1 second. Okay? In that 1 second, because of the way that workflow works, the workflow goes idle. Now, in order for the host to resume a bookmark, the workflow has to go idle. So all the transitions have to be idle. If I write a transition that does not go idle, none of the other triggers will ever get a chance. Okay? So the delay will cause the idle, and then we'll keep counting down. Now, look what happens here. In my condition, I say, if the countdown's enabled, and we got to 0, then we execute this action. Now, I'm doing this to show you what happens if we have a transition that's triggered, but the action does not pass. Okay? What happens is this transition gets rescheduled. Okay, so none of the other transitions are canceled or anything. This one will just get rescheduled and it will start over again, which is cool for our little countdown. So It'll count down, it'll wait 1 second, it'll check the action, still not 0. It gets rescheduled and it starts over. Countdown, wait a second, and so forth. So that gives us a nice little countdown. Okay, so if I go here to my program, I'm going to enable the countdown. Okay, and let's run it again. All right, so now you see the little countdown is giving me my countdown here. And if I enter one of these values, see, so I got that just in time. They canceled the countdown with 0 seconds remaining. Man, I was right on it. All right, so you can see that the countdown got canceled, the state 2 got canceled, but we went to state 3. Now, if I let it go, eventually it would have reached 0, and then workflow would have just ended on its own. Okay, so you can see how that behavior is kind of cool, so that in this case, we are reacting, but the workflow still has the option of saying, well, I'm waiting for something to happen. It's not happening in a certain amount of time, so I'm going to wake up and end the whole thing. So you can deal with timeouts that way. And in the State Machine Hands-on Lab, I have you dealing with timeouts as you work through that. So, by the way, has anybody done the State Machine Hands-on Lab? Anybody? Dude, you got to do that. All right. Anyway, if you did it, you wouldn't be here, right? Okay. Yes, question. Oh, when is the State Machine available? Today. Actually, it was available, when was it available? April 18th, I think it was. So it came out. If you follow me on Twitter, you would know these things. All right. Okay. All right, so that's the little workflow explorer thing, explore state machine thing. All right, so let's look at a little bit of the authoring. All right, so let's go. So I've got a little web application here, and I'm just going to add a new thing. So let's go here to workflow. We'll add a workflow service. Okay, so here's our workflow service, and it's if you've done workflows before, you've seen this, right? So let's pin this thing in here. Okay. Now, first thing, let's do this. I have this library on CodePlex with a lot of interesting and very helpful and cool things called Microsoft.activities. And recently, I figured out how to do this with NuGet. NuGet is way cool, by the way. Way cool. You guys, you know what NuGet is, right? Some of you do. All right. NuGet is a thing that the ASP.NET team created that allows me to create packages and put them out on the web. And if you want to use them in your project, before it was like, well, you have to go to this website, download this zip file, unzip the thing, put it in the right place, add a reference to your project, yada, 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 right? Watch this. Let's say if I want to use Microsoft Activities in my project, I can just say install package Microsoft.activities, if I spell it right, excuse me. Or I could just use the tab completion. All right. Boom. There it is. It's in my project. That was so cool. I was so happy when I figured that out. Not to mention the fact that I was able to put the activities in the toolbox here as well. So I don't have to go add activities in my toolbox and all of that. And I also have a unit testing framework there. So you can go Microsoft.activities.unit-testing and you suck in the whole unit testing thing as well, which has lots of great things for unit testing workflows. I'll show you that in a minute. All right. So now I've got all that stuff in there, but problem. I don't see state machine in my toolbox. That is a problem. All right, let me show you how to fix that. So how many of you have heard of .NET Framework Platform Update 1? Okay, and yeah, a very small handful. So once again, follow me on Twitter. You will know these things. All right. .NET Framework Platform Update 1. So the .NET Framework team leadership guys decided, it's kind of lame that we can only ship things in the .NET Framework every 2 years or something, or 2 or 3 years or whatever it is. And in fact, some teams are just like shipping things without, just shipping whenever they want on, CodePlex or whatever, stuff like that. And so they were saying, we need a way where teams can ship things more frequently. And so they were trying to decide, what to call it. And they came up with this name, Platform Update. So they have .NET Framework Platform Update 1. And so it turns out in that update, we were the only team that shipped anything. Okay, but they're going to have more of these. And so they think, once or twice a year or something, they'll have a platform update. And so what you do is you set the target framework. Now on our endpoint blog, there was a bunch of people commenting how they hate the name .NET Framework 4 Platform Update 1, and they were complaining about it. Look, what do I know? I'm just like a low-level guy. They tell me, that's what it's called, just live with it. So, I do. Anyway, and they even put the KB number there. Isn't that nice? All right, so you select the target framework that you want, okay? And when you do this, the version number of that target framework is .NET Framework 4.0.1, all right? So now if I go back to my workflow service and I look at the toolbox, aha, there is the state machine. So the state machine things are only in Platform Update 1. And there's a client framework version of it and the full framework version of it, and so you have to go get Platform Update 1. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is let's just cut this guy. We'll cut that. And we'll put a state machine out here. Okay, so now we got a workflow service that's a state machine, and your first question is, where do I put that receive that starts the whole thing? Good question. Okay, you have two choices. One choice is you could open the state and you could drop it right in here on the entry action. You could do this. Right? In that case, what happens is as soon as we enter this state, we're going to wait for a message to start this workflow. Okay? And so the message that activates the workflow would come right in here. And in fact, you have to be sure that you go in here and check this little box, can create instance. Because our template doesn't do it for you. Which is retarded, I know. I filed a bug on it already. But anyway, we're going to fix that. Make sure you do that. All right, so now we'd be ready to receive a message. Or the other choice is, okay, let's go back to our door. Remember that our door, the first state we want to think about is the state, kind of the default state where everything starts. Okay, so the first state was closed and locked. All right? And by the way, I don't know if you can see it. I'm kind of colorblind, but right down here in the corner, there's this little gray arrow that's very difficult to see. And I swear I didn't even know it existed for the longest time. But if you click on it, look at that. You can increase that size. That's really cool. All right, so we have closed and locked. And remember, there was another state called closed and unlocked, right? So we'll just drag this out here. And State Machine has this cool auto connect feature. So if I drop that, now I'll say closed and unlocked. Okay. Now the question you ask yourself is, what causes this transition? And so the thing that causes it is a message. All right, so let's paste a message in there. And I like to name the transition kind of for the thing that happens when. Right? So if you're familiar, any of you guys familiar with behavior-driven development? It's a kind of a methodology. So behavior-driven development has this idea where you say, given some scenario, when this thing happens, then I'm going to do this. And that scenario works really well with state machines because that's exactly what happens. Like, given that I'm in this state, when this triggering thing happens, like somebody walks up and puts a card key in the door, then I'm going to unlock the door, right? So that's the way, in fact, in the hands-on lab for the state machine that you're all going to do later, and we have it right here at TechEd too, I actually have you guys looking at this kind of very thing. So what we're going to do here is say, this transition, I'm going to name it authorized, because that means that somebody put in a card key that was authorized, all right? And then I have to set up, the messaging activity for the operation, whatever I'm going to call it, like authorize key, and set up the parameters and all this. You remember I said I'm not going to explain everything about activities and all that? This is the part where that applies. I'm not going to set this up. I'm just going to quickly kind of breeze through it. All right. So now we got a card key that we start in the closed lock state, and when somebody's authorized, we go to the closed unlock state. Now, when you put the card in the door, what happens? Makes a little noise, the little light flashes, and what's happening is it's waiting, and then eventually it gives up, right? It goes like, nah, nobody's opening the door, so I'm locking it. Right? It has a timeout. It's just not going to stay unlocked forever. You do that thing, it flashes for a little bit, and it times out. So if I have a timeout, what's going to happen when the thing times out? Given that I'm in the closed unlock state, one of two things is going to happen. Somebody's going to open the door, or we're going to have a timeout. So if I want to do a timeout, I can just drag a line back up here. Okay, and this is going to be my timeout transition. So I'll just call this timeout. Okay, and then timeouts are really easy to handle because all I have to do is go grab a delay activity and I drop it in there, and I can set up a duration. And so this is a time span, so I could say time span dot from seconds, 5 seconds or something. Now, I highly recommend you don't hard code timeouts in your delays like that. Actually, it's much, much better for the sake of testing and everything else that you pass in a timeout value from outside the workflow, right? But because this is a pathetic demo, I'm just going to hard code it. All right. So anyway, so you can see how you would get to the timeout. Then if I have another state where we're going to open the door, right? Okay, and so in this case, grab that guy and move it. So we'll call this state open. And then this is the transition here would be I'm going to receive a message from the door hardware, right? So the door has some hardware that's going to send a message that says like, hey, somebody just opened this thing, right? And it probably, when it sends a message, it would probably have to say, hello, this is room number 352. Somebody just opened the door, and that sort of thing, right? And so I get a message that again, I'm reacting. Okay, I know the door is open. And maybe I want to, keep an audit log or whatever, right? So you get the point. That's how you author these things. This would take a long time for me to completely author this. So let's just go to the finished sample. Okay, so here we are in the finished sample with the Silverlight app and the whole shebang. Okay, and I actually hosted this over in IIS with App Fabric. Okay, so that this is using Windows Server App Fabric so that you can get kind of a cool monitoring experience. So here's my door, and I've got the room, and the card key is just the GUID, and then the timeout that we're going to have. So we're going to open the door. Did you hear that? I have a little sound. There it is. It's open. We close the door. That's the cycle, right? Now, if I walk up, if I'm a bad guy, I'm just checking with a bad key. In my case, the only key that's bad is an empty GUID, all right? So if I try to open with the bad key, it's not going to work, okay. In fact, if I keep trying, eventually the security gets notified that somebody's trying to open doors with bad keys, right? Okay, and once the security is notified, then we have to get a new key. We have to get security to reset the door. Okay, and now it opens again. All right, so that's the cycle. And all of this is being controlled by my state machine back on the server that's tracking all what's going on. So let's look at the state machine. So you can see that we start out in the closed lock state. Now, one of the cool things about, I didn't mean to do that. One of the cool things about this transition, this first transition, is look at this. It has a split personality. Because sometimes you have a transition that goes one way if one condition is true, but it goes another way if another condition is true. This is what we call the shared trigger. Okay, so if I open this, so you can see that I'm receiving the authorized key message, okay, and in that message I get the room number, the card key, the timeout, and the intrusion threshold count, so the threshold before we notify security. All right, and so I get all this into my state machine, and then I check to see if their card key is an empty GUID, okay, and I check to see if I'm going to alert. Then I say, all right, if we're authorized, I reset the unlock attempt count, and then we go to the closed unlock state. But if we're unauthorized, so we're not authorized, then we go to the intrusion detect state, okay? So I can just click there, and in the intrusion detect state, I just increment the unlocked attempts count, so I can see if we've met the intrusion threshold, before we alert security. So the way in which you create a shared trigger, and you can create as many of these as you want, is a little bit tricky. I cover this in the hands-on lab, but just so you can see, let me zoom in on this. You see the origin of this transition. What I do is I just sit in here. You see it says drag a line to create a new transition that shares the same trigger. So if I just drag a line, a new one here, then we can go to something else, right? And now I've got another branch of the same transition. So that's how you do that. So let's kill that. All right, so now here's another interesting thing. It's kind of a self-transition. One of the things about the state machine is whatever state you are in, every legal transition that you have has to be shown. Now, in the old state machine, we had this idea of nested states. So you could have like inner and outer transitions. And some people liked that, some people didn't. Some people said, that's kind of confusing. And it was a little bit confusing because, you could have a transition at the very top level and it applied to every transition inside the state machine. So this diagram is pretty clear. The only way out of a state is via one of the transitions that you've allowed. Which means, if I wanted to support something like, you remember once we get into the intrusion detect state, like after I tried to unlock it 4 times, on the 4th time it said security's notified. What happens then is that I take this warning transition and we go to the alert state. Okay, and in the alert state, we'd probably like send an email or SMS or something, to the security people, like, you need to check this room, somebody's trying to unlock it repeatedly and that sort of thing. And the real hotel security systems actually have this. That's why I put this in here. And so when we get to the alert state, I still want to respond to authorized messages so that if you do try to authorize your card key, I'm still responding. But actually, once we're in the alert state, all of your authorized attempts will fail because I just set it to false. Like, once you're in the alert state, the security guy has to come and reset your door. Okay, that's my pathetic, lame hotel. All right, that's the way it works in my hotel. All right. Anyway, so I was just having fun with this and just experimenting with the different ways you could do it. Now, one other thing about this, you can see that here in this transition is where the security guy resets the door. One other thing about my messaging activities here. So the thing that starts this whole state machine is right here, where we receive a message to authorize a card key. So somebody comes, the first time they put in a new door, somebody puts in a key, it sends a message back to the server. If this workflow is not already running for that room, it starts a new one. Okay? So how did I create a workflow that maps to the right room? I do that with correlation. Okay? So in my workflow, I have a handle called room correlation. It's a correlation handle. All right? In my message, of course, all the messages about the security door would have the room number, right? Because you obviously have to know what room we're talking about. So I have the room number that I pass along to the message. And then, if we look at the correlation, you see that I have it correlates with room correlation, and here's the key, which is that lovely XPath that you can handwrite if you want to, but no one in their right mind would ever do that, because all you have to do is drop this down and choose room number right there, and then we create the XPath for you, okay? So all you got to do is have something in your message that you can use to correlate. What this means is that every room would have a different state machine that's tracking the state of the door, okay? And you notice something else about this. I have can create instance checked. That means the first time we receive one of these, if there's not already a workflow tracking that door, we'll create a new one, okay? But if the workflow already exists, we can keep looping around, so every time it goes through the cycle where we authorize, open, close, it loops back around. All right? Now, let's get to one other thing, which is the tracking information. So if I look in here in AppFabric, AppFabric is keeping track of what's going on with my workflows and services. So you can see that I've had 39 completed calls, I've had 7 errors. This is kind of at the WCF level. So there's been messages coming into my server and things are going on. Right now I've got 4 active workflows. So because I've been testing this, I've got 4 active state machines running. And I can see that they're idle. I can see the bookmark that it has, it's waiting for, what it's waiting for. And then if I right-click here and say View the Tracked Events, I can see everything that's been happening with this door. So this one's been having some trouble. I have to pick one when I was messing it up earlier. So that had an exception. I had an operation that failed. You get a bunch of things, right? So right now I've got this set to the highest tracking level, the troubleshooting level. So I can see everything that's been going on. So let's see. Let's find a better one. Let's see. This is probably the one that I just did. Okay. Yeah, so here's one. If you're familiar with workflows, they have tracking information. So we added for state machine a new kind of tracking record. But older code doesn't understand this new kind of tracking record because this record only exists in Platform Update 1. The tracking record is called the state machine state record, and it exists in Platform Update 1. Now what they did was they created a subclass of the custom tracking record, and they stored bits about what the current state is in the data of that. So if I'm looking here in AppFabric, AppFabric doesn't understand Platform Update 1, so it just calls it a custom tracking record. But if I look at the tracked variables here, I see current state, closed, locked, and it's in the security door state machine. Right? So that way I can look in my AppFabric tracking data, I can see what state this thing is in when it got that particular message and that sort of thing. So it really helps me to troubleshoot what's going on if I'm having problems with it. Now, let me show you one other awesome, totally cool thing. At least I think so. Let's just close all these windows. I got too many windows open. Okay, if you've ever watched Endpoint TV, you know that I love unit tests. I love unit tests. I'm a big believer in unit tests, and I'm frankly shocked at how many people write code and put it totally into production and have no idea if it works or not. And they just say, let's just put it out there and hope for the best. We'll fix a bug if it shows up, right? So when I started working on workflow, I was really like, wow, it's hard to write unit tests with workflow. I mean, for one thing, if you got a case where you have a workflow that does things like calls other web services or updates databases and things, you know that in unit testing it's a really good idea to isolate the thing that you're testing. And so people use techniques like mocks and stubs and fakes and all these things, and they get really bent out of shape when you use incorrect terms. But anyway, So I wanted to come up with a way where I could test a workflow, and I could do it in isolation, and I could even do things like create a fake or a stub for an activity that I didn't really want to invoke. Like if I have an activity that calls another web service, in my test, I don't really want to call the web service, right? I want to just fake it. So I created this whole testing library called Microsoft.activities.unit-testing. You can install it with NuGet. It goes out and sucks it right into your test project. And I wrote some tests. So, in fact, let's run all of our tests here. Oh, I ran it in the debugger, so it's going to be a little slower. Sorry. The default shortcut keys, by the way, for running tests, Control-R-A. Problem is, if you do Control-R and Control-A, it runs it in the debugger. If you do Control-R and A without Control, it runs it without the debugger. So if you're too fast and Control happens to be down when you hit the A, then you get what I just did. Actually, though, that's a good thing. Do you see what's happening down here in the I have a test failure right here. Boom. Let's just move on because I knew that was going to happen. Totally. All right. Okay. Where's my test? Stop. All right. Let's look at our test results. Okay, so you can see here, I had my test failure over there. This is why I still haven't posted this. This is what's great about the unit testing, though. Oh, I forgot you can't do that full screen. For some reason, it doesn't like to show these full screen. See what I have here in my debug trace? This stuff here is tracking information. And if you've ever looked at our tracking records and just go tracking record.toString, you get this horrendous looking, mishmash of stuff. It's terrible to read it. So in the Microsoft Activities library, I have extension methods for all the tracking classes that create nicely formatted, human-readable text for the tracking information. And see, now I put this into my test thing so that when I have a test that fails, I can go and look at it. In fact, let's go see what the one that failed here. So here I can see the exception. And what I'm doing in my test is I'm actually looking for a particular set of states to occur in a certain order. So for a given test scenario, if I run the test, I should see we did I expected that we started in closed locked, we got intrusion detect, closed locked, intrusion detect, closed locked, intrusion detect alert. But what I actually found was this, right? So I can see that the state machine didn't respond the way I expected it to. Now that's pretty cool, right? Because I would like to know that before it actually went into production. That's a good thing. So here's how I do these tests. So because I'm testing with the workflow service, I need to host this workflow. And I'm going to host it, and I'm going to communicate with name pipe binding. And I'll just host it right in the Visual Studio test process. So then what I do is I just deploy the XAML-X file along with the rest of the test stuff. And then I have a class in my testing library called Workflow Service Test Host. I just say, open that XAML-X file using the name pipe service address. And then I create a proxy, and I call a method. So here I'm authorizing a card key, and then I'm just saying, okay, notify it that the door is open and unlocked. Now notify it that it's closed and locked. Close it, wait for the host to close. And then I have, in my unit testing library, this is a helper just for state machines. So I say, assert that these states occurred in a certain order. Now, what I do I think it's a really good idea to do this, is I created a class called states. All right, and if we just go to that class, all I did was record just create these const strings with the various names of the states, and they match the display name. So that way, it allows me to just write some code that looks like this. And then maybe I want to say, well, I want to make sure that a certain transition applied, right? So what I do here is I just assert that we did this transition, that we received the door close message, and that in the tracking data that activity got all the way to the end and it closed, right? So these things like this host tracking assert exist, all this stuff, assert state, all these things come out of the unit testing framework that I created for workflow. And this is just scratching the surface. So, and then you see that I have all of this enclosed in a try finally. So in the finally, the last thing I do is I call host.tracking.trace, which emits all that nice tracking information into the test results. See? Isn't that cool? That's how I figure out all this stuff, how the state machine works. I can see why things happen in a certain order. I can see what activities were going on. You get tons and tons of information. And you know what this does is I don't spend a lot of time in the debugger, like step, examine, watch, and all this, because that's really a slow process. If I write a test and my test fails, I just go look through the tracking information. I figure out what happened. I can kind of post-mortem look at all the arguments, all the variables, all the data. It's a beautiful thing. In fact, you can see in here, my system is wigging out. I was afraid this might happen. Yes. Anyway, let's not do that. my laptop has been wigging out this week, and so let's move on. Okay. I'm going to give you 7 steps to state machine happiness. All right. Now, if you're convinced, you're like, I am going to do state machine. Here it is. 7 steps. How do you get there? Okay. The first step, you must go get Platform Update 1. Okay, we have links here. There's blog posts on the Endpoint blog, and you can go find these. And basically, the way it comes in 2 parts. There is an update just for the .NET Framework itself, and then there is an update for Visual Studio. Okay, so if you're saying like, I want to run a state machine on my server, you don't need the Visual Studio update for your server, okay? It's only the framework for your server. But for your dev machine, you need both of them, okay? By the way, you should be able to download these slides and everything, but like I said, we've got all this on blog posts. This is the hands-on lab I was talking about. We have it right here at TechEd if you want to do it while you're here. If not, when you get home, just search on the web for Introduction to State Machine Hands-on Lab. It's on the MSDN Code Samples Gallery. If you like it, be sure to give it a good rating. It's pretty good. I think so far it's done very well. People seem to like it. And there are videos on Endpoint TV. So the way I do it is I create a video for each exercise. So if you're doing that lab and you're kind of stuck or you don't understand something, you watch the video on Endpoint TV, and I will do it on screen and explain everything that's going on and take you through step by step. The third step, you have to take in your project, you have to set the target framework. So if you're doing web apps and workflow services, you want to choose .NET Framework 4 Platform Update 1. If you're doing anything else, like a class library, a console app, WPF or something, just choose .NET Framework 4 Client Profile Platform Update 1. Then the other thing, when I was talking about the behavior-driven development, I think it's a really good idea. Before you start drag and dropping shapes, think. I like to think first, right? So think about your design. And so I just kind of go through and make a little chart like this, given, when, then. And I just think about what are all the states that I'm looking at. A door that's closed and locked, a door that's closed and unlocked. And I think about the states, and I think about the when. What are things that trigger transitions in this model? Okay, and then what do I want to do when these things happen? Okay, and it's just that simple. You create a little chart like this, you will get a much better result as you go to build your state machine. Then you go in on the diagram and you start dragging and dropping states. And so states are really like destinations. You get there. We are in the state of Georgia. This is the destination, right? I like to create an enum or a string constant to describe the states in my code so that when I'm doing code in the C# side or VB side or whatever, I can refer to those. And then transitions are events where you respond and react. And you typically have one trigger per transition. Now, it is possible I could create a transition, and I could put inside of a transition another kind of control flow, like a pick or a parallel. So I could have one transition that received 3 different messages. You could do that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it just makes the state machine too confusing. You could do it. I probably wouldn't recommend it. And, okay. Step 5 is you want to deal with what actions. So you have the entry actions and exit actions anytime you enter or exit the state. So one of the things I did in the hands-on lab is you're building an ATM machine. And so ATM machines have a little camera, right? So I even put I have a WPF app that's our simulator for the state machine. So I have a little dot, like when the camera's off, it's black. When it's on, it's red, right? And so in certain cases, like when you enter a state, I turn on the camera, because, we want to get your picture or whatever, right? So that's the kind of thing. So there's an example like when, I did it in the action for the transition. So I wait for the card to be inserted. If the card's valid, I turn the camera on, so that kind of thing. Then, of course, the unit tests. Now, one of the things I've noticed about doing hands-on labs is that, when you do a hands-on lab, the lab builds on, each exercise builds on the previous one, which is good, but on the other hand, if you screwed up the first exercise and then you're in exercise 2, you're toast, right? I mean, you just start like going in circles and you can't figure out why it doesn't work. So with the state machine hands-on lab, I tried something new, which is that I have unit tests that are designed to catch, each state of the game. So I have a test list, like here's all the tests for exercise 1. So when you complete exercise 1, you run the test for exercise 1, and it tells you if you did it right or not. So far, people seem to like that. I also have manual verification steps if you want it. So step 7, if you're going to do workflow, I think it's a good idea to follow. We have some blogs. We have a new show, by the way. Endpoint TV is now becoming AppFabric TV. All of AppFabric stuff will be covered on the show now, including things like Service Bus and AppFabric caching, and everything in the world of AppFabric will be covered there. We have a new AppFabric team blog, so we are retiring the old Endpoint blog. So you want to follow that. Follow my blog, because there's so many things that come out constantly. If you're using this technology, you really should follow these things. Follow us on Twitter. We have a Facebook page as well, so you can follow us there. So you can stay in touch with new things that are happening. In fact, I was going to show you the ATM state machine, but my machine over here is hosed. So you'll have to just go do the hands-on lab. All right, so... all right, that session has already happened, so you'll have to watch that on the video. And I'll be in the middleware and integration booth, okay, in the product pavilion all afternoon. So if you want to drop by there and talk to me about it, it's kind of hard to find. We're like in the back. They're like, you guys are middleware. You're like the server guy. You're in the back, okay? You're in the back end, right? Nothing glamorous there, but we're back there. All right, so you can find me back there. All right, so we're going to have some time for questions. We got about 10 minutes left. And if you want, you can shout out your question, in which case I will be forced to paraphrase and repeat it. Or you could step to a microphone and say it in your own words. All right, so questions? Yes?
How about the consistency of the state machine workflow? When it is idle, can I move it to database or somewhere so I don't consume the computer resources?
Okay, great. So the question is, what about persistence? So let's say that we had, we were at a Las Vegas hotel with 10,000 rooms. And we're tracking the door state. And am I going to have 10,000 of these sitting in memory somewhere just waiting for things? No. Because the way workflows in AppFabric work is that, you remember that I said workflows go idle, right? So somebody puts a card in, we wake up, we go, oh, is that a valid card? Okay, great, we're going to track this, track it, and so forth. And then we wait for something to happen. While we're waiting and we go idle, Windows Server AppFabric starts watching. It says, that workflow is just sitting there doing nothing. And it waits for a timeout. Now, its default timeout is 1 minute. So after 1 minute, it says, that's it, I'm unloading that thing. It unloads it right out of memory. The state is all stored in a database. So then later when you come and you put in your card key again, because you're only doing that 2 or 3 times a day, right? Later, it puts it in, wakes up, loads it up, and it runs it real fast. So yeah, you wouldn't have all 10,000 of them in memory unless you really wanted to.
But you have to use AppFabric to have this feature?
The question is, do you have to use AppFabric to have this feature? And the answer is no. So the way we designed this, workflow is designed as a very independent thing, right? It can run in any kind of process, from WPF to server-side and IS and AppFabric and all that. And so what we do in the workflow side of things is we don't make any assumptions about what the host infrastructure is doing. And we provide things that if you want to, you can build your own host, and you can store things and wake things up and do that, and you can host it yourself. Although, if you're building something that's living on the server side, Windows Server AppFabric is a free add-on for Windows Server. It's probably just the recommended way to host it, but you don't have to host it that way. Yes, over here.
Is there a migration path to the 3.5 workflow, or is there like a wizard or something straight up with migration?
Good question. The question is there a migration from 3.5 workflows to 4.0 workflows? Kind of, sort of. As you can tell, if you did 3.5 workflow state machines, this is pretty different. We have a migration tool on CodePlex. They're updating it in trying to do some things with state machines. It's not going to be like run the tool, bam, spits out the other end, and you're good to go. It's not going to be like that, unfortunately. But Workflow 3 and Workflow 4 are so different. They're so vastly different. There's typically not a great story there, unfortunately. Yes, over here. Yeah. Oh, it's on my blog. It's on my blog today, actually. Let's see. Because I thought this might come up. So I posted it last night. Here it is, the blog post. Using workflow services and Silverlight together. So one of the things I learned is that Silverlight has trouble dealing with WCF faults. And so whenever Silverlight gets a response back from the server that it doesn't like or doesn't understand, it has one answer for that. And so let me see, I put this down here. Okay, see here, step 4, ready for the pain? This is what happens. If you get any kind of exception out of your workflow service, Silverlight says, not found. And I didn't know this, right? When I first started doing it, I went, why is it saying not found? My workflow service is there, it's totally there. I don't understand why it's saying not found. And so I actually, this is the truth, I logged a bug in our bug system. I'm like, you can't use workflows and Silverlight together, it just doesn't work. And so then all these people started looking at the bug and they were like, what? And so then I got a hold of Yavor's, my buddy on the Silverlight team, and Yavor's like, oh, no, you have to do this fault behavior thing, and he explained the whole thing to me. And then I went, oh, okay, I get it. So there is this thing called the Silverlight fault behavior. Now, the WCF Silverlight guys actually ship a template for WCF and Silverlight that automatically adds this, but they did it with a declarative attribute, which is something you can't do with workflow services. So I took their Silverlight fault behavior, I combined it with a Silverlight Vault element, which allows you to use it in config. And then I shipped this all in Microsoft.activities. So then I have the config here. So what you have to do in your config is you have to add the Silverlight Vault behavior extension. And then you have to put it down here, Silverlight Vault behavior. And now you will get the correct error that your workflow service threw. It will show up in Silverlight. So that was one of the things I learned. And then the other thing I did was I created another behavior called the workflow service trace behavior. So you remember how in the unit test I showed you all that nice tracking information? What the workflow service trace behavior does is it actually emits that into the Visual Studio output window. So while you're doing a little debug session, you see it right there, which is kind of nice. So anyway, those are so like I said, all of this is on the blog today. So that's why I say you should follow my blog, because I'm always learning new stuff, and and when I learn it, I put it out there. Yeah? Oh, to use Workflow 4 with SharePoint. So SharePoint, as you know, does not use Workflow 4 today. And we're actively working with them in some future place and time. That will all be wonderful, and Workflow 4 and SharePoint will be working together. Today, you really are, and I'm not an expert on SharePoint and Workflow. I have never done it. So all I know is that I think you can call a web service from their SharePoint workflow, I think. And if that were the case, then you could just send a web service message to a workflow service that lives somewhere else. And that would be the way you do it. But like I said, I've never done this, so I don't know. Other questions? Yes?
So will the platform update, is the platform update ready for production and trying the code, and what about Microsoft activities? Is that all stable and possibly when you roll into .NET 5 today, or is this,
So platform update is fully supported, released code, just like anything else in .NET Framework. Microsoft.activities is a different kind of animal. You should think of it like anything else you found, like here's some code I found on the web. Cool. It's a best effort. I mean, it has like a bunch of unit tests that come with it if you want to get the source and all of that, and party on and everything. I rev it fairly frequently. I think I just released version 1.8.2 like this week. And I just rev it whenever I get some interesting idea in my head, and I go, yeah, that looks interesting, and I put some code in there, and I write some tests, and I update it. Same thing with the unit testing framework. And so it's there if it helps you. Some of these things, by the way, might end up in product in the future, because it is sort of a testing ground for that. In the little sample I showed you about Explore State Machine, that sample is on Code Gallery today. And there's a blog post I have about it. I think I called it Advanced State Machine Stuff or something like that. Anyway, in that sample, I use an alternate API for workflow application that is in Microsoft Activities. So I added it as extension methods over workflow application. And it's really cool because it supports the task parallel library. It treats workflows like a task, and it allows you to say to a workflow like, I want to run this workflow until it goes idle with a bookmark with this name. Which in one line of code you could do something that would have taken 100 lines otherwise, right? So it's darn simple, and it's very cool. And so stuff like that could possibly end up in future releases. Just depends if I can convince them to do it. Okay. Yeah. My Twitter. Let me go back to. It's at Ron L. Jacobs, because some other schmuck had Ron Jacobs, so I had to put my middle initial in there. Okay. All right, thanks, you guys.